Hey guys, remember I told y'all that I'm going to start doing these weekly car chronicles, Nadine Car Chronicles, that's what it's called. And basically these are just story time. It's story time for me to encourage you, for me to strengthen you, for me to inspire you and uplift you. That's what these story times are really all about. But ultimately, it's to point your heart to God's heart. Because what's the point of being encouraged if you're going to be discouraged and remain in that discouragement? But if I'm anchored in God, yeah, discouragement may come, but it won't last because I'm anchored in the one that grants me encouragement. I'm anchored in the one that uplifts me. I'm anchored in the one that strengthens me. And that God doesn't change. He's dependable. He's consistent. He's reliable. So my strength and my courage can be dependable, consistent, and reliable. So here's this week's story time. This week's story time is actually linked to last week. And last week's story time, if you missed that, guys, just watch it on here on this platform and get your fill in of last week's story time. This week's story time, like I said, is linked, is a part 2 to last week. Because last week I didn't get an opportunity to share with you a very important key element to that story. And really and truly, without this key element, that story does not exist. So remember I told you last week that Tanya, my childhood best friend, went looking for my ex-boyfriend. She did a search, and my ex-boyfriend was also her childhood friend, her high school friend. And he and I dated in high school, but we went our separate ways. I went to prison. He went on to be a successful man. But I came out of prison and I'm serving the Lord. I have a child. I'm a single mom at the time, and I'm serving the Lord, and I'm content. I'm good in life, right? And I'm living in the state of Florida, minding my business until one day Tanya calls me on a Saturday out the clear blue to say that she's going to do a search for Benz in the Pennsylvania database because that's the last place she heard that he lived. So I was like, okay. She does this search. She finds 3 B. Raphaels in the state of Pennsylvania. So she calls the first one, and it's a man. It's not Benz. She calls the second one, and she leaves a voice message. And she calls the third one, and the phone just keeps ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. Every day she calls that number, the phone keeps ringing and ringing and ringing. And then one day she tells me, and I said, that's him. And she said, how do you know that? I said, because Benz is not a voicemail person. He's the type of person that if you miss him, you miss him. He's not a phone person to this very day. So she keeps calling that number. What she did not know is that Benz didn't have a phone in his house. He only had a cell phone. That number she's calling is his internet line. That line was only set up for him to have access, internet access on his computer. And so one day, Benz comes home and his internet isn't working. He's a techie guy, so he's finagling, trying to fix it, and nothing is happening. So he says, you know what? Let me go out and buy an actual house phone, plug it into the line, plug the line into the house phone. He's just trying to test to see, is this a line issue? Is it my computer issue? Or is it the internet provider issue? So sure enough, he goes and does that. He plugs the line into the phone, guys, and the phone keeps ringing. It's ringing and ringing and ringing. Now he's saying to himself, I don't have a number to this phone. I don't know the number, at least, to this phone, to this line, because it's just set up for internet. 1, 2, I have not given this number to anyone, so because I don't know it. So no one I know would be calling me on this line. They would call me on my cell phone. So this is a telemarketer trying to call me to sell me something. So I'm not answering the phone. But because there's no voicemail set up on the line, the phone just keeps ringing and ringing and ringing. And I don't know how many of you have heard a phone that just keeps ringing and doesn't stop. It's annoying. It's frustrating. So he answers the phone in frustration to tell the telemarketers he's not interested in what they're selling. And he hears Tanya's voice on the other end of that line. And that's how Benz and I got reconnected. Tanya goes on to talk to him, and he asks whatever happened to Nadine. Let me tell you what that points to. It points to an attribute of God that is my favorite attribute. Without that, Benz and I would have not gotten back together. And it's the providence of God. The providence of God is how God shows up in the details of your life. The providence of God takes into account our mistakes, our failure, our wrongdoings, our rebellion, our disobedience, our humanness. He takes all of that into account and still works together his good purposes for our lives. It's the providence of God that Romans 8:28 is talking about. Romans 8:28, when it says, and God is able to work all things together for your good, for our good, for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. It's the providence of God that Jeremiah 29:11 says that, and God has a good plan. God's plans for us are good and not evil, to give you a hope and a future, to lead you to an expected end. We see the providence of God in the story of Joseph. When God gives Joseph a purpose, a plan for his life, a destiny for his life in Genesis, and he's 17 years old. And his brothers get wind of that purpose and that gift and that calling on Joseph's life, and they sold him into slavery. While in slavery, he ends up in prison. And yet still, after all of that, Joseph still ends up being the second in command in Egypt, bringing about exactly what God's promise to Joseph was when he was 17 years old. Yes, it took 12 years, but God's providence worked it about that exactly what God said for Joseph. The purpose that God had for Joseph had to come to pass. That is the providence of God. It's the providence of God when Joseph actually meets those brothers for a second time again, after he's becoming after he becomes second in command in Egypt, and he says to his brothers, "You meant evil for me. You meant to harm me, but God turned what was you meant for evil for good. What is now being accomplished, the saving of many lives." It's the providence that says that it doesn't matter what the enemy tries to do to you. It doesn't even matter what people. They could try to block you. They could try to derail you. They could come after you to try to bring you down and all this other stuff. And God says, don't even worry about it. It is my providence that even after they do all of that against you, I will still work together my good purposes, my good gifts for your life. That's why the psalmist says, it's because of God's providence, the psalmist can say, be still and know that I'm God. It doesn't matter what the enemy tries to do to you. It doesn't matter what plans the enemy has against you. No, my plans and my will prevail in your life if you don't get in the way. Here's the thing about providence. Providence is not going to override your will. Providence is not going to go. So the providence of God can bring about God's good gifts into your life. It can bring about God's blessings into your life, but you got to receive it. You got to first be in position to receive it. And then you got to partner with it when it comes. When Benz came into my life, I had to partner with it. Even though I was content with the life that I was living, I had to actually give it a chance. I had to actually give him a try, right? Because I could have shunned it. I could have stiff-armed it. We could always shun and walk away from God's gifts. So this is why in God's providence, yes, he can send it our way, but this is why we need to pray and ask God for discernment, that I don't miss the gift that you're sending my way. That I don't look beyond the gift, the good thing that you're sending my way. That I don't stick. Because sometimes the providence of God, the gifts of God can come in a package that we don't prefer. Or it can come and we're not in a good headspace when it came. Or we're in our feelings when it come. And so God has given us these relationships and these good gifts, or this job, or this next position. Or he closes the door because he has a better door. And we get in our feelings and stuck in our feelings that we miss out on the very thing that we've been praying for. The very gift that God is trying to bring and send our way, that we walk away from the very thing that is purpose for our lives. So we got to ask God, Lord, give me discerning eyes to see the good gifts that you're sending my way. Help me, Lord, to come into cooperation with your providence at work in my life. And then pray and ask God, Lord, I welcome your providence in my relationships, in my household, in my life, in my career, in my education, in every aspect of my life, God. I welcome your providence. Have your way. Move your good plans into my life. And I thank you in advance for what you have already planned, the good plans that you have already prepared for me in advance. So I hope this encouraged you today to not swelter in thinking that this is it, that my life is just, You welcome the providence of God and watch him turn what the enemy meant for evil. Watch him turn it for good and bring about his goodness in your life.